What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stuckey.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Welcome into the Action Network podcast. We are presented by our friends at BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks, Brendan Glasheen in the host chair, joined today by Gilles Gallant. And I think you might know what that means, folks. We are in the month of August, and we are vastly approaching the 2024 NFL regular season. Yes, we are here for our Anytime Touchdown Manifesto episode. Gilles, this is your third year contributing at Action Network. This is your baby. This is your, it's near and dear to your heart, betting touchdowns. It's what excites people when they put on NFL Red Zone every Sunday, or even the primetime spots Thursdays and Mondays. So introduction, I don't think is necessarily needed, but what's exciting you about this coming year and maybe what you've learned in these first couple of years from doing this with Action Network?
For sure. And I think, Brendan, we have to highlight that this is the most fun type of bet to make. I think it's the most fun bet that's ever existed because it combines the fantasy element that we love. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are sports betting. They started off playing fantasy football, but then again, just that euphoric rush when you're able to predict the guy, maybe a long shot or something like that comes through. Now, the one thing I will say is if you're new to betting, or you've been doing it for a while, I've got some guidelines and some rules of things that will just help you. I think the best way to put it is this show today, Brendan, is more about not how we're going to make people rich, but more about how we make sure you don't go broke, especially betting on anytime touchdowns, because they're so fun that it can sometimes maybe get a little out of control, maybe bleed your bankroll. So these are some tips and things that I've learned over the last 3 to 5 years that have helped me maintain and make sure that I don't go broke and still have a lot of fun betting this bet type.
Yeah, well said. So the next 25 minutes, we're going to rip through Gilles' do's and don'ts, good data versus bad data, and how you can find edges in the market, especially after we get through those first couple of weeks, because the market does change on a week-to-week basis, and that introduces a whole variety of topics. And I'm sure folks that have tuned into our preseason pods leading into the NFL season, it could be depth chart changes, whether it be at quarterback, running back, receiver, injuries that pop up throughout the course of the year, a dude that just keeps getting bet on because they just keep on scoring, whether it be a Christian McCaffrey, for example, or going back previous years to a Jonathan Taylor or an Austin Eckler, just going back through the time sphere there. So let's start with what is your first and most important rule, sir?
Okay, so Glash, we're both company men. I think it's fair to say that you've got to use the Action Network app because the most important thing you need to do is track your wins and losses, because the average win rate for people who are betting on anytime touchdowns, especially straights, so not parlays, just betting straight bets, usually it hovers around between 32 to 35%. That's usually the top 1% of successful bettors in this market. I mean, it could be anywhere, but it could be as low as obviously 0% because it's such a volatile market. There's a lot of swings. There's good luck. There's bad luck. And to ensure you're not overextending yourself and want to see that overall profitability, it's important to track your wins and losses to see the successes and failures, to know if you need to adapt your strategy. And I mean, maybe you're old school and maybe you want to use a pen and paper or Google Sheet or spreadsheet. I don't care, but you've got to track your bets. Use something, and the Action app will help you do that, being able to track your anytime touchdown bets to see where the successes or failures are happening.
General rule of thumb, too, as we move on. So that's a great call out. Action Network app, free to download. It's an award-winning app. It's very helpful, especially for a market like this. And that introduces the topic of, I know that, and I'm not calling out anyone specifically. And I think folks at Action do a really good job at this. I really believe that. Nick Giffen is someone who comes to mind, and Brandon Anderson, who does a lot of NBA and NFL. Who gives a shit about the record, right? And you can't sink your teeth into record watching, especially on your Twitters and your Instagrams and TikTok, whatever it may be. But it's important to understand the profitability of this market, that you could win 33%, call it, of your bets on touchdowns over the course of a 2-week period. Why? Explain to the viewer and the listener as to why that you gotta let that not seep in your brain.
Yeah, I mean, profits and ROI are king. That's way more important than win percentage. And win percentage,
and that sounds obvious, right? But it's important because I think folks see a record and that sticks with them, but it shouldn't.
Well, I think, Brendan, you bring up a good point, because again, the floor of education for the average recreational bettor, I think, is much higher now than, say, when we first did this podcast together a couple of years ago. But you'll still go on a social media, whether it be Instagram or Twitter or X, and you'll see these accounts on socials like, I'm hitting 70% of my bets, but they downplayed the juice. It could be like a loaded minus 300 money line. You see that a lot right now with baseball as well, with those kind of money lines. But that's the beauty of touchdown props, because Brendan, on any given Sunday, there's 300 or more anytime touchdown props, and they all range from minus 150 to plus 4,000. And then there's other touchdown angles you could be looking at: first touchdown, last touchdown, first team touchdown. You could pick the first touchdown and the second touchdown consecutively. Like, there's so many different markets. But that's the key thing, is that because a lot of these markets have those longer odds compared to like spreads and totals, which are usually minus 110, there's a bit more forgiveness and margin for error, which means that you can invest less for a higher return, which means that you don't necessarily have to overexpose your bankroll just to be able to participate in this market.
You hinted at this a moment ago, and this introduces another rule of thumb of yours, which is there are some pitfalls to betting this market, right? What might some of those be?
Well, I think the first one, dude, is just being realistic and managing your expectations, because every year, I mean, right now, training camp's going. We're getting amped to see NFL coming up here. But every year we get into the first week of September, and almost every bettor feels like they're going to hit 100% of their bets. They have this uninhibited confidence, like Uncle Rico, Napoleon Dynamite type of confidence. Or like maybe on the level of singing Hot in Here for karaoke in a packed bar or something like that. But
it's a great visual.
So again, there's just highs and lows, and that's a general with sports betting, but it's especially important to note for touchdown betting, because you got to keep that even keel. Trusting your process is crucial, because if you do lose, you can't just rip it up and start over. You got to be able to follow the path that you've laid out for yourself. And I think these realistic expectations, then you can properly celebrate the wins when they occur, because that's the one thing too. Sometimes you'll be on a little bit of a losing streak and you hit one, and you almost feel numb to it. You don't even care that you won, because you're still hung up on a bet that you lost yesterday, kind of thing. So again, another tip, very common sense stuff, but this is just goes for average bettors, but even touchdown bettors. You got to have a clear mind. So if it means you got to exercise, meditate, go outside, touch grass, get some air in your face, get away from the devices. I don't care. Eat a healthy meal, but don't let the losses from these props shake your confidence, because that negativity just breeds more negativity, and it could actually make you a little bit more hesitant on betting on something that you might see an obvious edge for.
Yeah, and more specifically, so minus odds touchdown scores. I threw a couple names at you over the last couple of years, like Jonathan Taylor a few years ago when he was in the MVP conversation.
Yes,
I know
sir.
Christian McCaffrey's banged up. That is fresh news. He's probably going to miss the preseason, which is not really a surprise. Sean McVay has kind of set the tone on dudes' key offensive pieces not playing in the
Shanahan
preseason.
too, yep.
Right, and Shanahan has echoed those same kind of trends. So yes, you're right in terms of a not letting a bad weekend affect you in the long term. Speak specifically to just minus odd touchdown guys. And that's probably more of a thing as we get deeper into the year, when there's consistency from a certain player, whether it be a receiver or a running back, maybe sometimes a goal line quarterback like your Josh Allen's or your Jalen Hurts. But why that has to be monitored very carefully, the minus odds touchdown guys.
Well, it's specifically for overall profitability for the year. And I think you bring up a good example, which is Christian McCaffrey, because last year he finished with 21 touchdowns, scored in 13 of the 16 regular season games, had minus odds for every game. And sometimes We reported that on social on actionnetwork.com all the time. He was upwards of like minus 350 to score, which was the highest odds to score a touchdown
even in like playoff games. It was insane,
absolutely.
Right?
Well, and I mean, he did score. So again, like it depends on your viewpoint, right? But the 2 of the weeks that he didn't score, he was around minus 340, dude. And when you actually look at the full scope of the year for somebody like Christian McCaffrey, who was the reigning NFL Offensive Player of the Year, scored the most touchdowns in the NFL last year. He ended up finishing total for the year. If you had bet 1 unit on Christian McCaffrey every week, you would have made about 3.4 units in profit, which is not bad. It's better than obviously having minus units like the way that like Travis Kelce was last year. But this is the reigning NFL Offensive Player of the Year, where people are going to immediately gravitate to and want to bet him. And when you look at the full scope of the league, Christian McCaffrey was 93rd overall in anytime touchdown profits, 3rd on his own team behind Ronnie Bell, rookie Ronnie Bell entering his second year, and Juice, Kyle Juszczyk, the fullback. So then when you look at the 93 guys, so Christian McCaffrey was just ahead of Tyreek Hill for overall profits. And do you know who finished ahead of both of them? Former Bills wide receiver Gabe Davis at 3.8 units for the year. That means that you could have blindly bet Gabe Davis each week for 1 unit and made more money than the top 2 finishers for the NFL Offensive Player of the Year. That's how shifty anytime touchdowns are, in a sense that you don't necessarily want to gravitate to the guys who are the front-facing guys of their team or their league. And one of the things that's a little different too about minus odds. So I'm still in the camp that we need to avoid betting on anytime touchdown props at minus odds. But the 2023 season, dude, actually had a big swing on these, because in each of the last 3 years, the average for anytime touchdowns at minus odds is around 48%. But 2023 saw a huge spike. It went up to 54.6% on that. And so there's about a 6% swing from 2022 to 2023. So that immediately made me think, okay, there's something going on here. We have to look into this. And so why did it happen? A big part of it is based on the odds that I've tracked. Sportsbooks are slowly reducing the edges on these props. And defenses have also somewhat become predictable in their weaknesses. So 2 teams, one team that Christian McCaffrey played twice, which would be the Seattle Seahawks and the Carolina Panthers. They were the 2 worst teams versus the run last year in 2023, allowed the most rushing touchdowns, 24 and 25. When I looked at their matchups of who they played throughout the year, each team saw a running back with minus odds in 15 of their 18 games, and that running back scored in at least 13 of 18 games. So that means that 10% of all minus odds touchdown scores were scored on those 2 teams. Wow. So that's why it's kind of wild that it's like, okay, the defensive weaknesses are now being emphasized even more, where it used to be so obvious that you would almost avoid it. Now, last year, for example, that might have been a one-off example, but last year that was actually working out for bettors. Now, I'm still, again, of the camp that you want to avoid minus odds on touchdowns, because if you just use the analogy of, let's say a minus odds touchdown score is minus 110, you're already giving up nearly a 2% edge before you even place the bet. And the edge for the sportsbook gets, your edge rather, versus the sportsbook only gets worse as the number goes higher to minus 150 or minus 175. And because sportsbooks aren't offering a no touchdown option, you're kind of in a spot where you kind of have to avoid it, right? And there's just so much more value elsewhere for touchdown scorers that I just think bettors in general, especially recreational bettors, should just not even get caught up in betting favorites for anytime touchdowns.
Okay, that's really good stuff. I think that really serves the listener, because I think that's what's staring them in the face, whether it be a primetime spot featuring a McCaffrey or a big time back on a really good team. But yeah, I think that's a really good specific example as to what enters people's minds going into a given slate or just a given Thursday, Monday situation. So how to help people and avoid these types of things. You have a couple of suggestions as far as comparison tools and historical data, which again, that's going to be, you could look through a spectrum of years or a number of weeks when we're into the weeds of the season.
Yeah. So I think those 2 things are important, but I wanted to touch on parlaying touchdown bets before we talk about those 2 things, because in the betting space right now, parlays, it's only growing as far as popularity goes. And if people aren't careful, they can really overextend themselves financially. And this one might ruffle some feathers, but you almost have to treat parlays kind of like junk food. Like, it's okay for a treat, but it can't be your whole diet. Like, if you're betting touchdown scores, you got to keep parlays to a minimum with lower stake. That's why I created a nice content series this past year. It's a little fun parlay game called the 180 Challenge. And this is where I bet $10 on a parlay of 18 to 1 or better each week of the regular season. And if you hit 1 week, you're pretty much playing with house money because you make all your money back. And if you don't hit at all throughout the 18 weeks, which obviously would be unfortunate, but you're only down $180 for the season. So you still get to responsibly scratch that parlay itch because, for example, this series that I did last year, I ended up hitting one, but I didn't hit it until week 17. Wow. And it's because touchdown bets are super volatile because any player can leave the game on any play. And there's just so many random injuries where my parlay would just fall short one leg. And I just wanted to give people advice of saying, just save yourself the heartbreak of a losing parlay from injury. Don't invest big money into touchdown parlays.
The irony of week 17 too is that's right before you get into that week 18 where starters are sitting or a team is in a situation where they're trying to get a better draft pick. So you were hanging on the edge of your seat there, and it delivered for you right before that chaotic week 18.
But those tools that you brought up about odds comparison tools, or even an odds screen in general, are so important when betting on anytime touchdowns. And because the odds just vary heavily from sportsbook to sportsbook. And the best player I use as an example of that is backup quarterback Taysom Hill with the New Orleans Saints. He has the goal line scoring capability. He has the red zone carries enough where you would almost think that's worthy of a running back too on a team. But his anytime touchdown odds can range from plus 250 to plus 500 on a given week, depending on the sports book. So another suggestion, one of the best ways to compare odds is using the Action app, where you can use an anytime touchdown odds comparison tool. Helps you just quickly compare the odds between sports books and being able to find that best value. And using the Action app and having multiple sportsbook accounts, this will ensure you get the best odds and really can make a difference for those long-term profits at the end of the year.
All right. Wonder who's the next Taysom. We need our next Taysom Hill. We need a guy in the on deck circle, or at least.
I mean, that was Josh Allen last year, dude. Josh Allen ended up being almost 12 units in profit last year because he just went on a run from that Eagles game against the Bills onward, where he was essentially their primary running back, where he might as well have been in that Taysom Hill role, but you were never getting him at those varied odds the way that Taysom Hill is. So yeah, but at the same time, if they ever unleash Taysom, you're going to see his odds drop significantly, because when that guy gets inside the goal line, inside the 5, he is near impossible to stop.
Really important talking point, and everything so far has been valuable, but deciphering good data versus bad data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, box score context is key. I imagine you even know this is doing play-by-play. Like, you can't just look at a box score from the previous 2 games and be able to feel like you know what's going to happen in this third game, and be able to emphasize on certain points. And not all stats are created equal. Like, of course, if you're betting a wide receiver anytime touchdown prop, traditional stats like targets, receptions, and snap counts, those are important. But there's other data out there now that is accessible that can really impact your bets. So being able to see how defenses, just what kind of defenses are they running? Are they running a lot of man coverage? Are they running a lot of zone coverage? How does that skill player fare against man coverage or zone coverage? What's the route participation? Are they just out there blocking the whole time? Or are they actually running routes? How a defensive position does from a DVOA perspective, or even cornerback matchups. You can find these data points online now, and these are very impactful. And then there's other times, Brendan, man, where you got to just use the eye test. It might be just as simple as who's throwing the damn ball. Like, for example, I love Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson. Amazing wide receiver. He was 4th in the NFL last year, 168 targets. He had more red zone targets than A.J. Brown or Mike Evans. But he had Zach Wilson and Trevor Siemian throwing that ball. And that's just awful quarterbacks to be able to count on to get the ball to the wide receiver. And books just feasted off of that better mindset of he's due, or look at the targets, we have to bet him. And all the metrics and odds lined up like near the end of the point of the season. I mean, he was upwards. This is a wide receiver 1, Brendan, over plus 300 to score a touchdown. I still wouldn't have touched him because Zach Wilson is probably the worst starting quarterback I've seen since Nathan Peterman. I don't really know if there's another one that really rivals that. Maybe Mac Jones there at the first 6 weeks of last season.
Oof.
Sorry to stick the dagger there.
No, it's okay. Our audio director is also on this particular call. So that Nathan Peterman thing, I'm sure, hits. It's slow. The slow knife is twisting.
And so that's the one thing is that the data is perfect in that sense that you would need to consider all of those different things. But then another strategy, and this is so the data is important, but another strategy, what I tell for new bettors or recreational bettors is do kind of what you would do is making like your own model. So what I would do is take Ravens Chiefs opening game of the year. Take the 15 guys that you think are going to be there for anytime touchdown odds and write down what you think should be their anytime touchdown odds. And this way you could be able to see if you're close to market, far off market, and just to see kind of where your instinct is going. And then you could start to set up a kind of an expected odds model. So for example, if you had expected odds at minus 120 for Josh Allen to score a touchdown or a coin flip, but then you see that the anytime touchdown odds are around plus 150 and your research is lining up from the data, I'm never going to knock that kind of bet, especially where you're being able to get better value on that perspective. But on the flip side, if you have expected odds at plus 150 and it's even odds or plus 110, don't try and force it. Like that's the main thing that people will do is that they'll just be like, but I want to bet on Josh Allen to score a touchdown. It's like, you don't have to. And this is especially important for primetime games where the initial odds releases by sportsbooks are heavily skewed towards the popular players. And that means that you're likely betting into a bad number and not maximizing profitability. So if you have an odds cutoff or expected odds model in that front, it can at least put your mind at ease about maybe having FOMO for not placing the bet, because I think that's what a lot of people happen is that there are certain games in the middle of the season on like a Thursday that if this wasn't an NFL game, you probably wouldn't be betting it right now.
Yeah. Just for shits and gigs. I mean, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson featured in that game. That's fascinating, right? That's something you're going to be eyeing all year. Now, who knows how much Henry's got left, but playing with Lamar, how does that eat into Lamar? Or does Lamar eat into Henry? I mean, I wish we had the market out now, but we don't. But
I'm interested to see it because generally Lamar has never been over plus 150 to score an anytime touchdown because of the capability that he has. But again, there's only so many touchdowns to go around. Right. And a lot of the time these sportsbooks price the game as if there's going to be 6-7 touchdowns scored. And then we see a 22-14 game. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just sometimes a lot of the time those odds aren't representing what we're actually probably going to see on the field. But I do expect Derrick Henry, especially in that offense, if he's healthy, he will be routinely minus odds.
Okay. That's the, you use that example. You brought up that game. That is the opener. Baltimore Ravens at the reigning champs, the Kansas City Chiefs. The total in that game is at 47 or close to 47. So that reflects that there will be some scoring, we think. So you mentioned the odds cutoff. That's a good note. We hit on that earlier about minus odd touchdown guys. Recency bias, which this really, as I kind of mentioned a few times now, and you have too, once we get into the year and there's some trends, and this goes back to good data versus bad data, but how does recency bias, how can it help the bettor? How does it hurt the bettor?
Yeah, so you almost have to treat each game, especially primetime games, like it's a new week, new game, new day, and sometimes even like new teams because they'll have a new quarterback out there that you haven't really factored in of how they're going to play.
Or mentioning Josh Allen, a coordinator change that the whole scheme is changing, and not to mention this year with that Buffalo team with the new with no Stephon Diggs, how the receivers play out. But yeah, that was a big talking point last year when they made the change at coordinator and how they're going to commit to running the football. So.
And that was a big reason why they were able to make that push for the playoffs, because they completely put the offense in Josh Allen's hands, or specifically legs. And every time they got to the goal line, James Cook, even though he was priced at plus 140, would not get a sniff of a red zone carry. It would usually be Josh Allen putting it home for you. But the reason why I say the recency bias is that each game needs to almost be treated off as like a one-off event. Like, because if you carry too much from the previous week and that recency bias, you might just end up being too passive as a result when there's an obvious edge. And there's a 2-week sample that is the perfect example of the recency bias. And that was with the Las Vegas Raiders. The game in particular that I'm referring to had a pretty low total, some pretty inviting anytime touchdown odds, and that was Raiders versus Vikings in week 14.
Oh God.
The total was
the
40 and a
3-0
half. This
Yeah.
is correct. And I ended up betting I didn't already like the game. It was already 2 third-string quarterbacks. I wasn't a big fan of the game, so I only bet 2 touchdown bets each at a half unit. So Jacoby Myers at plus 350, TJ Hawkinson at plus 240. And as you just alluded to, that game finished 3-0. And it felt awful. You talk about the mind games and making sure that you don't beat yourself up for it. In the moment, it felt like the Raiders were the worst offense in football. I wasn't sure they were going to score another touchdown the rest of the year. The next week, it's Chargers-Raiders. And we're seeing 2 third-string quarterbacks. It's a total of 38.5. Well, Jacoby Myers, I bet him again. He scores in the first quarter. And the Raiders go on to score 63 friggin' points. Like, everybody just went nuts in that game. And yeah, I mean, the Chargers are the Chargers. They might be a little bit better this year with Harbaugh now at coaching. But yeah, like, it was just one of those things where you would think that the Raiders would never score another touchdown again. And they end up scoring, I believe, they had 40 points at halftime, ended up finishing with 63. So that's the one reason why I'm saying is don't let your process get completely shifted just because of one bad week. Because again, the NFL, new week, new day, and sometimes in these cases, new teams.
Yeah, man. And that, I think you might relate to this. That's very fresh and maybe a lot of listeners' minds too, because it's featured in that receiver documentary with Devontae Adams.
That's kind of what brought it to my attention.
Yeah.
I was watching it a couple weeks ago on vacation. I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe 66 points over 2 weeks and 63 of them were scored in one game.
And Pierce was Antonio Pierce was the head coach in both of those games. Amir White was the starting back with Josh Jacobs out, or maybe it was a week later. That it might have been that very game, that Charger game where Jacobs missed the rest of the year and White was the featured back. But it gets your mind thinking about all these particular things about good data, bad data, how routes are being run. So where you can go into a week and think, hey, well, Jacoby Myers, he hasn't scored in a couple weeks, but he's running the routes he's running against that Chargers defense. It checks a lot of boxes, and you got to be able to check boxes on both sides, and that's where you find your edges. Okay. Very good.
But that's what happens, though, Brendan, is that you could still feel like you have all the edges, the odds line up, the stats line up, everything is great, and then they get hurt on the second play of the game. Aaron Rodgers. It's just not for the faint of heart. You'll lose a lot. If you get tilted from a loss, you're probably betting too much, or you're just not being realistic with yourself. Again, going back to the top of setting proper expectations. And again, some games just don't work out. I mean, even the best NFL offenses only average just around 3.5 touchdowns per game. So the fact that right now, though, a lot of the time these sports books are pricing it as if there's going to be 6 to 8 touchdowns in a game, I don't think they're fully factoring in. And a lot of it is betting action that will move those odds and whatnot. So keep your emotions in check. Don't get too high, but don't get too low. Most importantly, we're all here to have fun. Let's have some fun, but let's not go broke doing it.
My last thought, too, I'm plugging this Netflix doc, but the insight, and I realize it was after the season that folks are seeing this, but the insight they gave on the injuries to your Deebo Samuels and then Adams, those were two that struck me. Like injuries in game. I know Jefferson and St. Brown had some stuff going on earlier in the year, but wow. It also just the accessibility now to information, and that speaks to your earlier point about the books are just sharper now with these markets. The better, I think, is more educated and smarter. And maybe folks that are tuning in have never done this particular market before and are new to the whole betting thing in the first place. But yeah, I mean, and that's an obvious one, I think, when it comes to good data, bad data. Follow injury news, right, each week and depth chart changes and whatnot. Okay, Joe Gallant, where can people find you? Of course, they can find you and follow you in the Action Network app, but what else do you have going on once the season gets going here?
Of course. So season 3 of the Touchdown Show is coming again for week 1 all the way to the Super Bowl. It's going to be each NFL Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern as part of the Action Network Power Hour. We're going to cover the latest odds for anytime touchdowns, give out some best bets each week. That's going to be on the Action YouTube page. Make sure to like and subscribe. And then I'm also going to be doing primetime NFL touchdown picks, both videos, and they'll be on the Action Network app in written form. Both will be available on the app or YouTube. And of course, each Friday I'll have an anytime touchdown preview for every game with angles, leans, important data, which guys I would bet for an anytime touchdown. And also I'm going to have my 2 interception props. I still do track the interception odds for all quarterbacks, which is one of my favorite markets to do. That'll be out every Friday as well. And if you still can't find that, you can just go on X, follow me at GDawg5000, GDAWG5000. I can guarantee that you'll be able to find all of this content there every week from the Action Network.
Excellent. The interception plug is, I miss Matt Ryan dearly. That goes back. That's a very specific example inside the walls when we were doing this a couple years ago. This is your 3rd year with Action Network betting touchdowns. Gilles Gallant, again, he plugged it there. Find him in the Action Network app, and then it will take you on an adventure where you can find his content throughout the course of the 2024 NFL season. That concludes the Anytime Touchdown Manifesto episode. Thanks to Gilles Gallant. I'm Brendan Glasheen. The Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. You all have a great NFL season. We look forward to more from Gilles.